Hey, today we're creating API documentation from scratch. And not only that, we'll be talking about designing APIs in an API first way and then generating an OpenAPI file from our designed API, connecting everything to GitHub, then using GitHub as our CI platform, basically connected with a documentation tool called Scalar. Scala is basically just a tool that takes an OpenAPI file and renders it into OpenAPI documentation, into this sort of thing here that you can then host yourself. And we will even go as far as hosting it on a domain that you then can point to a public domain, and we'll be doing everything with Cloudflare Pages. The cool thing about this flow is it is quite reliable. Like, you have a very robust way of applying changes to your APIs. Everything is also 100% free. You can host on Cloudflare Pages for free. You can connect to GitHub for free. With Scala, they have a paid service, but we'll be using some of their open source tooling, which includes the API documentation. And then we're also going to use Vite. Vite is, we're going to be using React, and Vite is some tooling on top of React that allows you to just compile your project a little bit faster, specifically in dev mode. It takes care of this new ES module syntax that makes everything very fast. But don't be intimidated. You don't need to know React for this. This is a super easy walkthrough, and you just need to edit, I think, 4 lines of React code, and that's pretty much it. So I would say let's dive right in. So the first thing we're going to look at is sort of how we actually design our API. How do we arrive at an OpenAPI file? And here the world is a bit split between some people who think it is a good idea to generate OpenAPI files from code, and then on the other camp you have folks that say this is kind of doesn't scale, and it's also not that great for security, and it's also a bit annoying to maintain all these code comments in your main backend repository file, especially if you're not the only one who works on API documentation. So with an API first approach, it's usually a bit easier. You usually start projects by defining the changes to your API, and once you defined these changes, you would implement your backend according to the changes the way you designed it. It's a bit similar to maybe something like test-driven development, or to using something like Figma to mock out a UI before you actually build it. But enough talking, let's dive in. So we'll be using API-Fiddle, and for this you just go to API-Fiddle.com, you create an account, and then you're in this workspace view. For this we're going to create a new workspace, so we're going to open this new workspace as well. And we're just going to load in the example. And the example is a bookstore. It has some endpoints to add a book. This is the endpoint to add a book, to retrieve a list, to get a book, yada, yada, yada. So a couple of endpoints. If you want to add a new endpoint, you just click on create new. You can delete stuff. You can add responses. All these responses, you can reuse them. It's pretty handy. I don't want to get too deep into that. In the end, I'm going to show you also the flow of how to apply changes to your API. That's when we return to API-Fiddle. But this should be it for now. Like, we're good. We just use the example here. This is the API for a bookstore. And an important thing we have to do now is we have to connect API-Fiddle to GitHub. But before we can do that, we actually need something that API-Fiddle can connect to. So we go to GitHub, we create a new repository. We call this API Docs test. And this is a public repository, and we do not want a README. So we create the repository here. Okay, great. So let's set up our coding environment. So let's do like a basic setup of our repo. So for this, we actually go to Vite, and Vite has this very handy command that walks you through a setup of a new project. So we're gonna do this here. We actually gonna do this. Okay, then we just copy paste this here. And we're gonna call this API Docs example. And we're gonna choose React as our framework of choice. Then we create it with TypeScript, and that's about it. Then we go into API Docs example, that was that, right? And we open our code editor in this file. So let me expand this. Actually, the right view here. Okay, great. All right. So Vite basically created a React project, which is basically just a scaffolding. It just contains a couple of files. You can check it out. It contains like an app file, like it's let's install it actually here. So this will just install the dependencies, and then we can, I like to use pnpm. Pnpm caches the dependencies on my system, so I don't always have to replicate or re-download libraries that I already have. So we go pnpm run dev, and that spins up our dev server. And let's look at what we actually have. Let's open a new tab. All right, this is what we have. We have this sample app here, just Vite React. And one important thing, like Vite configures some style configurations here that we don't need. They will just mess with, these are applied globally as well. So these will just mess with the API docs we want to create. So we're gonna delete this here. We're gonna delete the index.css. We also delete it from here. We also don't need the other imports, but that shouldn't be too important right now. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the Scalar app. I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. We're going to go to the website, which is just scalar.com, and we're going to scroll down. I actually had to go over this website a couple of times because it was a bit hard to figure out what they actually do and the products that they actually have, but they have the section here, integration for almost everything. And you're going to click React, and then you have this install command for their API docs, which are React based. And we're not going to use npm, we're going to use pnpm here. So we're going to go pnpm install Scala. Okay, that's it. And so to install everything, it is insanely easy. So don't be intimidated by any sort of lack of React knowledge or anything. It is insanely easy. So you can basically copy this entire file here. Just open your code editor. You go into, after you deleted the pre-applied styles, because they'll just get in the way. Then you just go to your app.txs file, and you select everything, you paste everything in. And now they have an example OpenAPI file here already. The only thing you have to configure is basically the path to your OpenAPI file. We can use the example here just to show you what is rendered. Let's go to Arc. Let's go to the dev server we spun up. And you can already see here, we have a fully running React app that renders our OpenAPI file. That was super easy, right? Took almost no work, 5 minutes of setup, and we're done. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back to API-Fiddle. We're going to choose the workspace we just created. And we're going to go to client and OpenAPI here. And this will give us a link to an OpenAPI file. We're going to copy this link, and we're going to switch the URL we see here with the definition we created. That's the wrong browser. We're using Arc for this one. And we're going back to our dev server. You can already see like it's already working. We have everything working on our dev server. We have the URL set to localhost here, which is maybe not perfect, but we can change that in API-Fiddle. We have a documentation of all our endpoints, and everything is rendered. Great. All right. Next step. For the next step, we're going to go back to API-Fiddle, And okay, here's actually the thing. Like, this will not work until our GitHub repository has at least one commit. So we have to make an initial commit to our Git repository. This is important. I almost forgot this. So we are going to connect our code to the GitHub repository. So we're gonna go git init. All right, and then we're gonna go git status, git add all, git commit to init. All right, this created one commit. And then we're gonna connect our remote repository to our local repository here. So this is what we just did. And then we are going to push git push. I actually saw I made a bit of a mistake here. So we're gonna run back. Nothing bad here. It's just that we actually don't need the URL. We'll actually sync a local file with our docs here. If you would have the remote file, this would also be an absolutely valid way to do things. This means that you could edit your OpenAPI documentation, just an API-Fiddle, and whenever you're done with any edit, the updated version would be automatically on your app, which is also a great way to do things. We're going to configure things a little differently here. So we're actually going to see and have the ability to approve changes to our API through GitHub. So we're going to configure API-Fiddle to make PRs to our GitHub repository whenever we want to change our OpenAPI file. This gives us just a little bit more security. So, but for this, we're actually gonna break things here for a second. We're gonna assume that we are going to sync our OpenAPI file just in our public folder right here. So we're actually gonna break things and we're gonna change this path to /public, because this is a relative path. We are still on the same origin, still on the same domain. So we use a relative path, and we're gonna go openapi.yaml. All right, this is what we have. And then we're gonna update this real quick. Git add all, git commit amend. All right, cool. And then we're gonna push. Oh, the current branch has no upstream. Oh yeah, okay, great. We connected, we set sort of the connection to the remote repository, but we still need to connect our main branch here. All right, great. I hope you could follow. This is all very standard procedure with GitHub. You can also find just the instructions of how to connect a repository to a remote repository just when you create a repo. It's all here. All right, great. So we have our first commit. But now it's actually broken. So our rendering is broken because we do not have the OpenAPI file at this relative path. How do we get this? How do we get the path now set correctly? For this, we're gonna go back into API-Fiddle. We're gonna go to our workspaces, and then we're gonna click on edit here. There was this marker symbol here, and then we're gonna click on connect to GitHub. We're gonna choose our personal account here, and then we're gonna select API docs test. The important thing here is be very mindful to not just select all repositories, only give permission to the repositories you actually want to connect. Anything else is pretty much a security risk. And it's really unnecessary to expose so much access to repository to any sort of GitHub app. This is a good advice no matter what you do. So you're going to click save. And then API-Fiddle will have connected to GitHub to the right repository. Now we've given access to a couple of repositories, but the right one was API-Fiddle API docs test. We want to sync with the main branch here. And we said that we're gonna sync the file we have in API-Fiddle to our public repository and then to the file openapi.yaml. So we're gonna connect the repo here. All right, this connected to the repo. So To sync things up, API-Fiddle will have created a pull request for us directly in our GitHub repository. And we can see that what API-Fiddle has done here, it has created this file in the nested path public OpenAPI.yaml. And this is exactly what we wanted. We wanted this file to be here. This is the domain we specified earlier for our OpenAPI file. Then we click merge pull request. We confirm the merge. All right, great. API-Fiddle also automatically deleted the feature branch here for us. We can go back into our code editor and see if everything works now. We can go like git pull, which will pull in the remote changes. We can see we have a new file here, public OpenAPI.yaml. We still have our dev server running. All right, great. All right, and we can go to our dev server to see, okay, now we have the new file running for our relative path and everything works. We have a remote file here. And the last thing we can do is we can actually connect everything to Cloudflare. So connecting to Cloudflare will deploy our code, and it will first deploy to something like a pages.dev domain, but you can easily connect this to any domain you have, either with Cloudflare or with any other provider. But first, before we go into Cloudflare, I actually introduced a small bug. So if you go into this file, into the React app we just created, and you look at the URL, like before it said public OpenAPI.yaml. This is of course wrong, right? Because we don't expose the public path, so to speak. So if we put something in the public path, it will just be available under our usual route where our app is available, and then we can just reach it with just like slash and then the path of the file or any nested directory. So the public here, you need to delete that. And then you need to add it to GitHub again, push your changes, create another commit, and then it's just OpenAPI.yaml. I already did this here before connecting to GitHub, but it's very important, otherwise it won't work correctly. I keep opening Chrome. This is not what I want. I want Arc. So we're going to connect to Cloudflare. We're going to go to cloudflare.com. You're going to log in. I'm not sure if you already have an account. You can also use Vercel or Netlify. They have similar products. You go to Overview. You're going to go to Create. You're going to go to Pages. You're going to select Connect to Git. I already have my account connected, and I already have the repository connected that we've been working on. So all I'll do is I'm going to click Start with the setup. You can give your project a name, you connect it to the main branch. Since we're using PNPM here, I'm not gonna use any framework settings. I also don't think they have one for Vite. This may have changed by the time you watch this video. All I'm gonna add here is this PNPM run build, and the build output directory should just be dist. And I think that's it. I think we're good to go. I'm going to click Save and Deploy. And now I'm going to fast forward a little bit so you don't have to wait this entire deployment process and wait for the deployment to come through. But I think we're good. So now our deployment worked. It is now deployed and things are looking great. We're going to go to Continue to Project. And this will probably not work, right? We're going to click here and the site cannot be reached. This is because Cloudflare makes these sort of URLs available via DNS, and it just takes a couple minutes for the values to be propagated through DNS. But while we wait, I'm actually going to show you why I think this entire flow is so great. So when you think in a more of an API first approach, the comparison to like generating your OpenAPI file from code is always like, how do you actually apply changes? If you're working on a bigger project and you need to change the API, you would usually need to implement the entire backend before you get a new and updated OpenAPI file, or you just apply the changes manually. If you think API first and generate the API contract first, this can actually be super handy, because you go into something like API-Fiddle, and when you want to apply changes to your API, all you do is you create a draft, you give it a name, I don't know, add endpoint, and then you apply changes. You delete an endpoint, you change the parameters, you do something, and when you're done, you just click submit draft. This will automatically create a PR. But now you have all the changes you want to make in a project, you have them done. If you're working with a front-end developer or something, they already have an OpenAPI file available. They can generate tests from it or an OpenAPI client and whatnot. And when you're all done and you're ready to update the master spec, you simply submit your draft. You go to the PR. You have your file that we just created in GitHub. It gets automatically updated. All the changes have been applied. With here, we just deleted the endpoint, and then you can simply merge the PR, and then your new documentation with the new changes to your files are gonna go live. We can look at this here in Cloudflare Pages directory, and you can see that these are the preview deployments for the PR. They're running, and then there will be a new deployment process for the changes you just merged. But that is just some words on the process. I think our main page should be ready by now. Let's try it out. No, it's still not ready. Oh, now it's ready. Okay, great. So yeah, as you can see, we now have a super robust process in place of how to change our API in an API first way, and of how to deploy our API documentation to currently a pages.dev domain, but you can super easily just point to one of your custom domains. And this is a great way to publish API docs. Scala also has a ton of features to customize the theme or customize some of the attributes here that you see. Something to consider is that this is not very well SEO optimized. You can see the path is not changing. So if you're looking in the future for something more server-side rendered, let me know. I may publish a video on that if there's enough interest, and see you next time.